Hello, my name is Kristen Strosta, and this is my co-presenter, Karen Deary. We are both PaTTAN consultants. I'm with the East office. Karen is with the Harrisburg office. We have a low battery, so we have help coming to, to look at that. But we're here to talk to you today about Renew. By a show of hands, can you tell me if you are doing Renew in your school? Is anybody doing Renew in school? Okay, so you're just here interested and looking to find out more information. That's exactly what we were hoping the audience would say. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So we'll get started. As I said, both Karen and I work for PaTTAN. Raise your hand if you've heard of PaTTAN. Good. Thank goodness. All right, good. We always start our presentations with reminding ourselves of our mission and vision. And our mission at PaTTAN is to build capacity. So PaTTAN, in terms of Renew, we have a great partnership between our PaTTAN offices, our intermediate units, and our local education agencies. Our intermediate units provide that localized training. So if you are interested in learning more about getting Renew at your school, you can talk to us and talk to your local IUs, and we'll be able to help you out with that. We also have a commitment to the least restrictive environment. So we're with Renew, as we go over this presentation and talk to you a little bit more about the students we're targeting with Renew, we're really focused on those kids who are at risk of dropping out of high school. So they're kids who in a few years are going to be leaving our high schools and going out into the community. So we want our students to be in the least restrictive environment once they leave the high school as well. So Renew definitely helps us both in high school and with community inclusion as well. So before we get into the content of Renew, we want you to just take a minute and think to yourself. You can talk to your neighbor if you want, but try to remind yourself of what the 14-year-old you was like or the 17-year-old you was like. What were your goals? What were your dreams? What were your passions? What did you think life held for you when you were 14, when you were 17? What did you want to be? Where were you living? Were you driving yet? Hopefully not at 14, but what were you doing in school? And who did you rely on? So think about who was in your circle. Who did you rely on? Who was a support at home or at school or in the community? So just think about that for a second. And then also think about that one student in your school that you worry about every day, and answer these questions for that student. You know, who does that person rely on? Who is that student support at home, at school, in the community? I imagine it might be different when you answer the question for yourself versus answering the question for that student that you're worried about. But oftentimes when we're doing this Renew training, it kind of takes you back to what your experiences were in high school. And some people come to Renew because their experiences were pretty unsettled and they needed more support. Others want to provide that support that they experienced in high school to other kids who need it too. So keep that perspective in mind as we're talking more about Renew. So Renew is out of the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability, and it stands for Rehabilitation for Empowerment. That was done just so I could see if I know the acronym, right? Rehabilitation for Empowerment, Natural Supports, Education, and Work. Because we have a UNH person right here, so if I didn't get it, she might revoke my Renew privileges. But Renew, so I'll just keep talking. So Renew is out of University of New Hampshire, and it's really a school to career, a school to work initiative and support for our students who are struggling with mental health needs, with academic needs, and who are those students who are at risk of dropping out of high school. So I'm just going to follow along the slides there. Sure. Sure. So it's really focused within PaTTAN. It's organized both under our behavior and our transition initiatives because of its focus on that school to work and school to post-secondary education or career options for students. We know that students who exhibit emotional and behavioral challenges in high school have very poor outcomes once they leave high school. So they may not complete high school. They may leave high school without a diploma. They tend to be disengaged from their families and disengaged from social support. So they don't have really, they kind of see adults as aversive. They see those social supports as aversive and don't move towards them and kind of move away from them. They may require, they may have mental health or substance abuse challenges and may require support with that. And unfortunately, incarceration may be something that is an unfortunate outcome for some of these students. So these are the students that we're looking to, with Renew, to find that way to help with that transition from high school to post-secondary life. We also know disproportionality is an issue for individuals in high school who are struggling with staying in school. We know that students with disabilities are more likely to experience out-of-school suspensions than students without disabilities. We know that, that African-American students are more likely to experience suspensions and expulsions than students of other ethnicities. So this is another kind of factor that goes into, we have to do something differently with students who are experiencing these challenges, and Renew is one of those things that helps us give that different perspective and brings different supports to the table. We also know, in terms of the mental health needs for students who are at risk, that school oftentimes becomes the de facto mental health provider for students. It's the one place that students are. It's the one place we have access to them, and so high schools are struggling with how can we provide those, get access to mental health supports for those students most at risk. If the mental health supports aren't provided in the school or they're not sufficient, sometimes juvenile justice system becomes the next level of support. But all those who are identified do have those poor outcomes because they're struggling with connecting to natural supports, struggling with kind of putting together all these challenges. Thank you. So everybody can kind of follow along. Struggling with how to work through their complex lives and figure out the next step. And thank you. One more. There we go. Oh, okay. Thank you. On this slide too, once we get to it, I'm on slide 8 of the mental health needs of youth. We also know, I looked up the statistics, and on the slide it says suicide is the 4th leading cause of death for young adults. Unfortunately, as of 2016, it's the 2nd leading cause of death among young adults. So unfortunately, I wish we could revise this slide and revise it down, but unfortunately we have to revise it up. Thank you. Perfect. So given all these factors, given the challenges that students with mental health and emotional and behavioral challenges are facing, Renew brings a lot of different pieces together in order to provide supports to students who are making this transition. So in terms of the context, we're looking at those students who are disengaged from school and disengaged from their community. They may be involved in mental health supports already. They may be involved in child welfare and juvenile justice systems. And they may be experiencing failure in school, home, or the community. So that's the targeted group of students that we're looking at. Renew brings facilitators to those students in order to provide three things: personal futures planning, basically mapping, person-centered planning, to really help teach students a way to structure their lives, structure their strengths, think about what barriers have gotten in their way before, and put all of that together and teach action planning and goal setting. So that's the personal futures planning. The second component is an individualized team development and facilitation. So once a student has that idea of a picture of where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go, with the help of the facilitator, they work to develop a team that can help support them meet their individualized goals in terms of high school goals and post-secondary futures planning. The third component is that all of this planning is personally relevant because it's completely individualized. So it's person-centered, it's student-centered, it's student-directed, it's student-driven. So it's not teachers coming together and planning for the student. It's the student coming together and planning for him or herself with the support of people in their lives, either at school, at home, in the community, and ideally all three. What we're looking for in terms of the outcomes of that process are improvements in self-determination. So we're not only giving the student kind of the knowledge that they need to be self-determined about themselves, about what's out there for them, but we're also giving them support in doing that, instruction in doing that, and a lot of opportunities to practice it through that individualized team process and action planning. We're looking for more student engagement and self-efficacy, both behaviorally and academically. So students start to realize that school is a place where people understand me, where I can be, where I can get the academic skills that I need, where I can get the supports that I need that will help me in my future. And we're also looking to bring together more natural supports for the student. So we know that in a few short years, this student will be gone from high school, hopefully with a high school diploma, and needs to go out in the community. And there needs to be supports out there for the students so that once they leave the school setting, they have places to go where they can find those supports when they because we all do not do it alone, and we need to help students understand that and find places where they can go. In terms of the longer term improvements, we're looking at that improvements in emotional and behavioral functioning, educational outcomes, and connections to employment. Oh, is it working now? Thank you. All right, so we have a number of videos on our website. Maybe at the end we can show everyone the website where these resources are found. But at this conference a number of years ago, I thought we would be in the same room with the same wallpaper background, but we're not quite. A number of years ago, we had a session, and we have the full videotape on our website. We're just going to show you a couple minutes of it, but PaTTAN invited students who had gone through the Renew process to come and talk about their experiences. So we're going to show you just a short 2-minute clip of a young man named Lance who, to my knowledge, has graduated from high school, graduated from post-secondary school, and is on his way to employment. But he's going to talk a little bit in this clip about what life was like for him before Renew, when Renew was introduced to him as a resource and as an option for him.
I'll tell you guys a little bit of something about before I started Renew. 9th grade year, I did pass all my classes, but I didn't really care what happened to me in my life, so I was just like, yeah, at school, I'll go to school. And then 10th grade year, I failed 5 of my classes. I didn't care. I left school every single day. It was 5th period. I left, out the doors. I was gone. I didn't care what anyone thought of me. I thought everyone was like, who cares what Lance does? He's just another kid who goes through the school. Thought all the teachers just didn't care. No one talked to me. I was just a person that was just by myself. And after that, I failed the 5 classes. I went to go to summer school, and I went to summer school for 2 days and said, I'm not doing this. It's stupid. There's no point to do it. So then the next year, I came back to school, kept doing the same things. It was the beginning of 11th grade year. I kept doing the same thing, leaving school, who cares? And I was just fed up. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my guidance counselor and asked her for my dropout papers. And she told me that, what's the point to drop out? Why do you want to drop out so bad? I said, it feels like no one cares. I can't do it no more. And she told me to take a week, think about it, and then come back and talk to me later. And then a week later, she came to me and she asked me, do you want to start the Renew program? And I was like, I have no clue what that is. And she brought Miss Jackson there. And when she said, do you want Miss Jackson to be your team facilitator? I was like, I have no clue who that is, but I guess I will start it. I don't care. And anything that will help me. And she was like, all right. And so I started the next week.
So we'll just stop there. This is just a little preview. Like I said, you can go to our website and view the whole video. But when you're watching Lance or the many other students that we have kind of video record of their self-reflection on before and during and after the Renew process, you get this feeling that they're so self-reflective and they have such perspective on where they were and where they are now and where they want to go in the future. And you're like, wow, this is like a magic pill. Where can I find this? It's not a magic pill. It's just doing the work of helping the student realize all these things for themselves that we all know. But if it just was, if the solution was just for us to tell them what to do, they would have figured it out by now. The solution is for the students to figure out where they need to go and where they want to go. So it's great to hear from the students and hear about their journey. Thank you. So a little bit about the foundation of Renew, and Karen will talk more about this. We've talked about the goals. Primary is high school completion. That's the goal that the school wants for the students. And ultimately, once the students go through the process, that's, even though they struggle and they may want to drop out, that's a goal that they all want for themselves as well. Employment, so getting kids experience with jobs and employment in school, helping them prepare, whether it's post-secondary education or going directly into employment, that's a goal as well. And community and inclusion, again, connecting with the community, helping them understand where the supports are in their families and in their community so that they have a place to go once they leave high school. The core values of Renew, you can see there on the right side of the screen. We've talked about self-determination and natural supports, the importance of that community, unconditional care. Every day is a new day, no matter what they did the day before. Starting fresh, always coming back with that attitude of let's focus, let's figure out what the next steps are. That's super important to just be there for the student. Some students need to hear that message a lot of times before they begin to believe it, because they've had such a bad history of not feeling that applied to them. Strengths-based planning and service provision. So again, this is not, there are assessments in a way, but it's really helping the student understand what's important to them, what they see as strengths, and developing those strengths along the way because of the focus on student-directed and student-led. Flexible resource planning. If any word applies to kids with emotional and behavioral challenges, it's flexibility. Things never go in a linear progression, so we need to be flexible, and we need the support of the school community, administration, and other teachers in order to figure out ways that we can help students get on that path to graduation. As Lance said in the video, he went many years in school with gaining very few credits towards graduation. So he needs flexible, creative ways to make up those credits and get him on the path to graduation. School connectedness. So again, we've talked throughout these brief number of slides already about how students feel disengaged from school. Lance thought, what was the point of being in school? He was gaining few credits. He didn't see that anybody cared about him. It didn't sound like he cared a lot about himself either at that point. So just think about students who are in your school, students who may come to school drunk or high, students who may engage in behaviors like property destruction, either at home, in the community, or at school. What do you think those youth think about themselves when they're engaging in those behaviors? What do you think that the school community thinks about those students when they see those behaviors? Do they just see those behaviors, or do they see the underlying issues that are happening underneath? So helping students connect to the school, helping students see that there's value in them, that there's value in them seeking out help and support from the school community and the community at large is part of the process of Renew that takes time and effort, but is super important to helping students get on the right path. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, Kristen. So I just want to back up a little bit and just make an introduction here that we are fortunate enough to, as Pennsylvania, to have been involved in Renew for many, many years. And you'll see at the bottom of this slide where we have highlighted some of the folks who have contributed to the manual, the Renew manual, and the pulling together of all of the resources and putting together all the strategies and the goals and the things that Kristen kind of highlighted for you in the last couple of slides. We actually have from the University of New Hampshire, we're so lucky because she's attending our conference today and tomorrow, and you will hear her present tomorrow. So Kathy Frankauer is in the, Kathy and I met today for the first time, but we're on a first name basis, mostly because I don't know how to pronounce your last name because I heard you say it one time. Francoeur. So Kathy Francoeur is here with us from University of New Hampshire, and she's one of the authors and one of the researchers for Renew. So very happy and honored to have her here. Welcome, Kathy. Thank you. Looking forward to tomorrow. So Renew employs 8 strategies throughout the course of the phases that I'm going to talk to you about as you implement the whole program with youth. And the first one is the person-centered planning portion of it. We're going to get into that a little bit, and we're going to get our feet wet a little bit with that. Have you heard of person-centered planning? Has anybody been involved with that before? I see some heads nodding. Person-centered planning, in my experience and background, we did a lot of it through a PATH process or a MAPS process. Does that sound familiar to a lot of you with your undergraduate work, perhaps, if you were in special education? We do a lot of person-centered planning for our students with significant disabilities, and we've brought that into, University of New Hampshire has brought that into the Renew process as well. So we're going to talk about that mapping process that we go through with students that really sets the course for their progression through all of these other 7 strategies involved in here. Once they finish the mapping, they do some individualized planning. Remember, Renew is all student driven, so everything is very individualized and led by the youth. We listen to them and we follow their lead as they work through this process. Part of that is taking a look at what are the resources that are available to me and how do they work together. So we call them braided resources or individualized resources. The resources that work for me may not work for Kristen and might not be available to Silky. So what is available in my area, my community, in terms of what I have access to? I went up and trained Renew with a school team, and they don't have any kind of public transportation at all. They can barely get an Uber driver. They're so remote, right? So how are we going to get these students to and from a job if they don't have a driver's license and they don't have any support to get them there? Even things like that. So really mapping out those resources that are available. Kristen talked to you about the flexible or alternative education type of programming. There are ways to offer credit or some sort of support for youth who are falling behind in terms of the credits that they are earning throughout their career. And we're doing more and more. I just sent an email to Silky the other day. So Silky Caparelli is our other state Renew trainer. Silky, raise your hand. She's our other state Renew trainer. She's from the Pittsburgh region, from the West, PaTTAN office. And I just sent her an email the other day looking for suggestions for how teams can possibly offer some credit for being involved in the Renew process because of the time and the intensity that it takes. And they can recover some of those credits that they haven't earned. Looking at school to career planning, or what happens after high school. It's all about that transition, right? What are the naturally supported employment opportunities available, again, through that community braiding, through the people available to support and be part of that youth team. Kristen talked to you a little bit about. There's a mentoring component. So what do we do to keep this student on track? How did we get Lance, not only through Renew and the mapping process and putting together the team, but how did he get from there to graduating from post-secondary education at an associate school? And then what are the community connections that are sustainable? So not just what do we have in place now for a student who we can support through their high school career and get them to the point of graduation, but then what's available beyond. So again, looking at how can we get them integrated within their communities? How can we get kids to have those connections? Because if they don't, they're going to fall kind of off the bandwagon again. So what can we do that is sustainable for them and makes sense for them and is relevant to them? Because so many times at this level, the kids, and you heard Lance say it, not in so many words, but what's the point? Why is this relevant to me? Why do I have to take algebra, the age old, right? My sister's a math teacher. Jennifer, why do these kids have to take algebra? Give me a good reason that I can give to them, right? Those kinds of things. So Renew is broken down sort of, if you look at it this way, into like a 4-phase process. And I'm going to take you through each of those phases very briefly in the time that we have left. The first one is the one I was talking to you about, the person-centered planning, the futures planning. This is a process in Renew that we call mapping. And there are 9 maps that students work through. So once a facilitator has been identified and a youth agrees to work through the program and the process, the first thing we do is start out with this sort of investigation of their life. Where did you come from? Where are you now? Where do you want to go? And as a facilitator, I'm going to ask the questions and I'm going to record the responses and things like that, but I really am going to let the youth lead this. So I know this is one of our favorite parts of the training because we actually practice the mapping when we do trainings with teams. It's amazing what you find out about your own self that you thought you knew, but you don't, when we take you even through this mapping at like this surface level. So to hear kids share their stories and their experiences is more powerful than anything I could do if I just asked them questions or sat down and tried to have a conversation with them. Because like Lance said, he's like, Miss Jackson, I don't know who that is or what you want me to do with her, but okay, she can be my facilitator. But a facilitator can really get into, tell me who you are. Let's build on what you bring to the table for a better future for you to get you to where you want to be. So sometimes when I'm working with facilitators and I'm training them, they'll come back and share some of the mapping experiences and whatnot. And they'll say, but he told me, and I know that's not true. What am I supposed to do about that? You know, student led. If that's what the student and the youth wants to believe that their life is, eventually through the process and when they become more comfortable, the truth and the reality will come out, and you can sort of, again, cache that and pick out the strengths from that and move forward. But just the mapping process really does get down to the nitty gritty of let's see where you want to go. You tell me, and we'll figure out how to get you there. And when the kid comes and tells me, I want to be an NBA player, it's not my job as the facilitator to say, do you know that only 1 in 10,000 kids become an NBA player? Whatever, I don't know, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, fine, great, NBA player. What's the first step we need to take to get you there? Because all the skills that I can teach in leading a kid on that path are important life skills, right? What's involved in that? Being on time, determination, being self-reliant, all of it, taking initiative, right? All those things. I can teach all of that, whether the youth becomes an NBA player or not. Those are still life skills that I can teach. So the 9 maps that we take them through is the first one, we start with the student history. Tell me about your life in the past. The youth may choose to start, I was born on May 14th, right? Or they might start from last year, whatever they're comfortable with. Especially because in the first map, if the youth did not know the facilitator prior to this, might be a little uncomfortable, and they might not be very trusting of somebody new coming into their life. So you let them start. Again, student-led, student-driven. The second map then moves into, okay, tell me who you are today. What do you like to do? What are you doing in school? Do you have a job? Okay. And through all these maps, there are prompts, there are questions that are suggested to the facilitator that they can ask. The third map is, great, now, what are your strengths and accomplishments? What are you good at? What have you done that you can brag about in your life? Okay. Fourth map is your people map. Who are the people in your life, and where do they fall in terms of their support for you? More on that in a couple minutes. The fifth map is what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And the kids will inevitably say, the teachers who yell at me, that doesn't work for me. I want a teacher who doesn't yell at me. Whether that means the teacher's raising their voice or if that's just an interpretation of the way that the teacher responds to the youth. But we get that a lot. Number 6, what are your dreams? If you could have anything at any time in your future, what are those dreams that you have? What do you want? Number 7, what are your fears or your concerns or your barriers? What are the things that might get in the way of you reaching and fulfilling those dreams? What are the things that you're afraid of? And number 8, so let's talk more now in the now. What are your goals? What do you want to do with your education? What do you want to do after high school? You walk out of here on June 2nd, then what? Okay. What are some goals that you have for your life? If you have a youth who isn't quite sure, can't come up, then start to pull that back. Well, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Or the age old, where do you see yourself in 5 years with our company? And number 9 is taking those goals and starting to prioritize. Because we can't do it all at once. If we have 6 goals listed up there, it's very hard to tackle all of those. But one of the ones you're going to get most often, well, I want to get my driver's license and then I want to buy a Porsche. Okay, let's talk about how to get your driver's license. You can worry about the Porsche after you get a job, right? Those kinds of things. So those are the 9 maps that we take the youth through. Here's a question. So her question is, when you're working through the maps, can you go back, I'm going to answer your question with your question, can you go back and add to the maps that you've already done? The maps are fluid. So you'll see when I talk about the teaming process, you're always bringing those maps back out. They should always be accessible so that you can go back and add and change, right? So the history map or the where am I now map, where youth might not be completely honest with you. They're going to tell you what they think that you want to hear, or they're going to tell you only what they want you to know. Inevitably, through the process, they will come back and say, hey, can we go back to that first map? Can I add this? Can we go back to my dreams map? I really want to do this. Absolutely. The maps are fluid. They're a living document. They should always be out and ready and available. Does that answer? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Here are some examples of some youth maps that we have to show you. So you can see on the left-hand side, there is a dreams map. The maps are represented graphically as much as you can. We want lots of color. We want lots of pictures. The kids don't want to see a bulleted list of their life because their life is not that organized or sequential. And that's not what they want to see. It should be vibrant. And again, it should be living. It should look like it's moving on the page. So these were this particular youth's dreams. This one wanted to become an EMT and wanted to go to college. And you can see there's the driver's license and the Porsche, those kinds of things. Wants to be on their own and own a pug in their own house, right? Those are dreams that the kid has. And they're all attainable at some level. Absolutely. On the right-hand side, then, are those obstacles that I talked about, the fears and the concerns and the barriers that might get in the way. Time doesn't slow down. Don't we all know that? Right? So that might be a barrier. There's always a deadline for something. I don't get enough sleep. Okay? All those things are things that might get in the way for this particular youth. So let's get a little bit of practice. Okay? In your packets, I made sure everybody had one. Is there anybody who doesn't have a packet? In your packet, you should find a people map and a what works and what doesn't work map. In the training, we would partner you up and you would pretend you were a facilitator and somebody else would pretend they were the youth. Thank you. I'm going to let you off the hook and you're going to work on your own map because you may not know the person sitting next to you. But one of the maps that I do kind of present just so people get a feel for what kids are truly going through, sometimes I'll present the people map where you fill out your own. Even though we're practicing in partners, the people map a lot of times I'll do on your own, and I'll tell you why when we're done. So find the map in your handout that says people map and is a drawing of concentric circles. Okay? And please write on this. If you want a blank this is always my thing. If you want a blank copy, I'll give you one. But please write on this. This is your time to do. So what you can see is you do have directions for map number 4, the people and resources in my life map. Don't worry about those. That's if you're the facilitator. But today I'm your facilitator. You're the youth. And here's what I want you to think about. In your inner circle, I'd like you to write down names or initials or however you want to identify people on your own map of the people in your life who are the closest to you and you could be the most helpful to you. Who are the people you can really, really count on in your life? And you write those in the smallest circle. I understand that you may not be finished with that circle. I'm going to move you on, though. In the next the next circle that says good relationships on your paper, these are people who are in your life, but they're not really close relationships. There might be friends, but not your best friend. It might be your aunt or your uncle, people like that who sometimes could be helpful for you, but they're not your closest relationships. So list those people, write those people. And let's move to the outer circle that says people paid to be in my life. Who are those people who are in your life because they're being paid to be there to provide a service for you? So who might that be for us? Your financial advisor, your real estate broker, your doctor, dentist, anybody like that, people who are paid to be in your life. Okay, and you're out of circles, but you're not out of people. Because in the outer edges, there's one more group of people that we need to consider. Who are the people who are in your life, but they're just not helpful to you? They're a part of your life, but their relationship with them might be a little bit more on the toxic side. Who are those people that you just can't count on? They're in your life for whatever reason. They could be friends, but maybe they're not helpful friends. Or maybe they're just people who aren't good for you, but you have contact with them for whatever reason. This is a difficult map for youth to complete, to talk about. Part of the reason is because they see a very small group of people who are in their lives until they start looking at it this way. We usually don't ask kids to categorize people in this way. And kids don't usually think about people who are maybe a constant in their life might not be a good, supportive person for them. So yeah, my best friend might be Tina, but she's not, I shouldn't use that name. That did not mean anything, right? It didn't. Oh my goodness. So anyway, so somebody in my life might be a really good friend, but just isn't supportive of me. And maybe that relationship is a little bit toxic. So if I'm thinking of a student in school, remember Lance talked about the kids who would come up to him in the morning and just say, all right, I'm tired of being here, let's go. And he's out the door. So that's a friend of his. That's a person who he's really close to and who's in his life a lot, but that's not a supportive friend. That friend might fall in the outer corners, okay? So really having kids categorize people in this way is so helpful for when they move forward in this whole process and they get into their teaming process. Okay. One of the other maps that we included for you is what works and what doesn't work map. So turn to that one. That should look like a T-chart. There should be 2 columns there. And if you look on the page, you can see some of the prompt questions that a facilitator could use if they're new at facilitating, or if the conversation kind of runs stagnant or the youth isn't sharing, could pull out some of these questions. So looking at the what works column, what works for you? What are the situations where you're more successful? What I'd like you to do is think about 1 or 2 things that work for you in your life that you really don't want to do without. How would you depict that graphically? I don't want any words. How could you depict that graphically? Now think of one thing that doesn't work for you. What's something that might get in your way, or something that really frustrates you or makes you angry or just doesn't work for you in your life? And depict that in the right-hand column graphically. So now you all have to go back to art school before you become facilitators. Now, because you know what? The way you draw it, whatever it is that you're representing that the youth says, it doesn't matter, because the youth will know what that meant and what that stood for. Okay? People get hung up on, but I can't draw, so I have to write it down. You don't. The youth will understand. And it really is, the maps are for the youth. They're not for you. The maps are for the youth. It's a way for them to express themselves and get it out. Sometimes, and I've had this happen, typically the facilitator will do the drawing. It's just taking notes, but in a visual, more graphic form. As the youth is talking, sometimes the student will say, that's not what I meant. You didn't do that right. Give me that pen. And they'll take the marker and they'll just take over and they'll do their own drawing. And that's okay too. That's okay, absolutely. Or if I get stuck as a facilitator, because I can't draw, I like stick figure, not even. And if I get stuck as a facilitator drawing something, I'm not quite sure how to represent it, I'll say to the youth, well, how would you draw that? What would that look like if you were going to draw that? And let them help me out there. Okay, so a lot of different ways to do this, but making sure you get the youth involved, and you're really just giving them a chance to tell their story and to continue learning about themselves and maybe thinking about their lives in a different way. During the mapping process, it gets very difficult. We have a lot of counselors and a lot of social workers who are facilitators, who are trained as facilitators, and we have to be very clear this is not an opportunity for them to provide a counseling session. This is not counseling the youth. This is recording their story in the way that they want to tell it and express it, so that you can move on to the next phase, which is the individualized planning. So once the mapping is done, the youth looks back at that people map and they say, okay, who do I want on my team? And they build a team that will help them to plan and implement action steps for moving forward, for reaching those goals that they prioritized. An example of an action plan is simply what needs to be done. So what is the overarching goal? What are the steps that need to be taken to get there? Who's going to be responsible for those steps? And what's the timeline for getting them done, getting them completed? You could also have a resources. What materials or resources do I need in order to help me reach this goal? Whose name do you think I want to see most in this responsibility, who's responsible column? The youth's name. Other people's names can be in there, but remember, student-led and student-driven. And the problem with a lot of the times that we're supporting kids through reaching goals and action plans is that they just now, in 10, 11, 12 years of their school life, they just expect somebody else to step in and do it for them. And when somebody doesn't, they blend into the woodwork, and then like Lance, and then they're happy there, and then they drop out. And this is what we're trying to prevent through this process. So who are the people can help me, but I'm responsible for myself, and I'm responsible for my future. And I can be responsible for it. I can be a leader, and I can be independent. So you can see up here, this youth wanted to get a Social Security card. For whatever reason, she didn't have a Social Security card. So what was the reason for that, and who can help her do that? Her mom, or I guess in this case, Anthony, his mom would help him do that. Get an identification that is not a driver's license, because maybe at this point in life, they're not ready to get their driver's license. That's okay, but they're still going to need some kind of formal ID. So how do I do that? Does the youth even know that exists? Probably not, right? So we're there to provide and fill in those gaps, but they really are responsible for doing the work. I'm not doing the work for them, okay? And then phases 3 and 4. So this whole entire process, we kind of put in a recursive circle because you're constantly moving in and out of these steps through this planning process, which is why the mapping, the phase 1, is right up there as part of the circle. You're constantly pulling these things out and going back and forth. You want to make sure that the goal, that the action steps connect to the goal, that the goal connects to the youth's life and what they shared with you, and that you're staying on track. So you're always going back and looking. So we're looking at then the implementation of this action plan, helping the youth sequence and decide, what can I really handle? How much can I really do in my life at one time? And what is the best way to get there? What do I have to do first before I can do the next step? And once they reach a goal, once they reach that bigger goal, then you add another one and you just keep working. At some point, there will be a sort of fade out plan. That's part of the action planning when you get to that point. And the fade out plan could be because, you know what, the kid just needed a boost. They just needed a kickstart, and they just needed an idea, somebody to help them structure what's going on, and then they can be independent. And they can manage their team, their youth team. They can do that. Or you might have a fade out plan because you have a youth who is actually going to graduate, and how do they transition from being in school where it's so structured and everything is so provided to being out on their own and independent and back into this life because of their friends and their family or whatever, that maybe wasn't as supportive. So how can they take the lead and be in charge of that positive path and that direction? So that's the transition to less intensive supports. So I'll tell you, Lance, when he went away to college, they had a fade out plan for him. And part of it included he had still the contact information and the ability and the support to get in touch with his facilitator even from college. So Lance is from the western region of the state. He came to college over in Lancaster County. So he didn't have family with it. He was himself. But he could always go back and connect with that facilitator if he had questions. So this is Lance's journey. Lance went from failing 5 classes in 10th grade and going to his counselor and asking to drop out to finishing his 2-year program at Thaddeus Stevens in Lancaster, making the dean's list every semester he was there with a 4.0. Lance wasn't going to do that without some kind of support through high school and getting him there. And he will tell you the story. So we have a state advisory panel for Renew. Lance has been added as a student representative to the state advisory panel, which is so exciting. And he attends the meetings and he shares his youth perspective. And here's what I needed in order to get to where I am. So he earned his degree. He is employed. And he will tell you, like, I showed up on campus and somewhere in his first semester, he lost his ID card. Well, all of you know that that is your lifeline to everything when you're in college, is that college ID card. He said, I'll tell you, if this had been 3 years ago before Renew, he said, I just would have dropped out and gone home. I would have figured out how to get home, and because I wouldn't have known what to do. But simply because of Renew and the strategies and the supports that were in place for him, he knew that he could go and ask somebody and that somebody would help him get a new ID card. And they did, and he was fine. But it was even something that seems that minor to us. Like, I know to go to whatever office it is that has the camera and take a new ID card, and here's your $5 for my new ID card. But he needed that support to know where to even go. Talk about a success story. So we're here to tell you, Renew is a flexible, person-centered, it is student-led, student-driven program for youth. It's designed to foster competence by creating supported educational and career-related experiences in which the youth can be successful. So some will take more baby steps than others, but you meet the youth where they are to move them forward. It is designed to be flexible and individualized. No one program and no one experience is going to look like another. And it is designed to build social resources for the youth. It is designed to get them reconnected with school, with their families, with their communities. It is not a program, and it is not a classroom sort of sized course. It is individualized per student. So what does that mean as a facilitator? I'm going to take on 1, maybe 2 youth at a time. This is a tier 3 support. It is intensive for both the youth and the facilitator. As one youth moves farther through the plan implementation and process and becomes more and more independent, then as a facilitator, perhaps you take on another, okay? But this is not something that we're providing for half of our school. Okay. Do you have questions that we can answer for you? We have a couple of minutes. Yes. Great question. So when you get to that point of action planning or team building, you're building the youth's team, who approaches those other people? So who approaches, the youth will tell you who they want on their team. They may or may not want their parents or the person who's raising them. They may or may not want their siblings. They may or may not want their best friend. Who approaches them? You work that out with the youth. So again, that's part of that individualized. You're going to have a youth or a student who is very strong and very capable, and they understand sort of how to do that. And you're going to have other students who do not, like, I don't know how to approach an adult and ask them to be part of my team. You can role play that stuff, and you can build those invitations either digitally. You talk to youth about, no, it's not okay to text this person and invite them to be part of your team. Yeah, you can text your best friend and say, hey, come be part of my team. But you cannot text your boss, perhaps, or you cannot text your science teacher or your coach or whatever, right? So you talk about the appropriateness of that and how you would approach them and do that. Yeah, great question. Yeah. Are there youth who are not candidates? Absolutely, which is why we're talking about your tier 3 really intensive needs supports for kids. So you would build first at the school level. I'm not talking about the youth team. At the school level, you would build a core sort of renew team. If you're implementing a multi-tiered system of support, it might be your tertiary team. It might be your tier 3 team. It might be a different team. Your team sets the criteria for students that would be appropriate to be enrolled in Renew. We, during the training, will give guidelines for that, but your core team builds that structure.
And then how long, do you have a time, like a general recommendation on how long to work through it?
Do we have a general recommendation for how long to work through that? Great, Kathy.
The process is again fluid, and we broke it down by phases. So that first phase, that mapping phase, again, because you want to go broad and not deep. Gold standard is to do it within 30 to 45 days. You're thinking about a 40-minute session, 45-minute session perhaps, a meeting with a student weekly, and doing maybe 2 to 3 maps in that time. So that's kind of what, and this is school day, so minus vacations, snow days, whatever we get in our area. So that's the gold standard, and then within 2 weeks, you want to set up that first team meeting and keep that process moving forward. Part of that we know is better for the student engagement if we have this, they can see the results of what's happening from the mapping.
So just to reiterate for the camera, mapping, you're looking about 30 to 45 days, school days, days that the youth actually attends school and comes to your meeting. So you try to get that in within 30 to 45 days, and then within 2 weeks, get that youth team up and running, right? You want to keep it going. You don't want to let it drag. I know that we're at the end of time, so I'm going to give you the code. I'll hang around, Kristen. I'll hang around if you have a question. The code, SP, like salt, pepper, 654. SP 654. Thank you all so much for attending and for your participation and engagement this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the conference.